Good afternoon, it's Cassidy from Tactile Technology, and we're going on to our second stage of this piece where we're talking about cyber ranges and their use. And when I say good afternoon, and it's 2 o'clock for me, but for poor Jesse 9 over on the west coast of the US, it's actually morning, it's 6 a.m. So we've got him quite early to be able to support what we're talking about today. So good morning, Jesse, how are you?
Good morning, good afternoon.
That's it. So, like last week, we talked about cyber ranges and we talked about the generics of what a cyber range provides. So we were going through. It creates this environment where it's a safe environment where we can create a high fidelity or immersive experience for cybersecurity, providing all the components to be able to go through an attack simulation and for the defenders to defend against it, but also have the ability to use objective measurements to understand how effective the defense has been or the attack, whichever you're really evaluating. Because in some cases, you might want to evaluate your red team to see if they're actually good enough at actually doing the attacks, as well as be able to evaluate your blue team and see how effective they are at defending against an attack. So depends on your position which you're looking at, but either way, we've got objectives we can set and we can measure objectively what's actually happened. So that's the key things about a cyber range, creating a realistic environment like a simulator and ensuring that you've got all the tools to be able to do everything you need in there, and also that it looks like your environment as well. So you're using the same tools you're using your environment to defend or to attack. And they're the key things. But what we're going to talk about today is actually a live fire event. So what a live fire event is, what you're trying to achieve in a live fire event, and how one's actually put together. So, the starting point, the design aspects of it. So over to you then, Jesse. So what would you normally start? What would be the start of the process to get a live fire event together?
So the start of the process is actually really way back in the range building. So
Okay.
really the start of that live fire event process is to start customizing the range to or building the range from scratch to meet the needs of whatever that live fire event will be. So
Okay.
just to give you an idea, a live fire event could be having to deal with one organization, or it could be multiple organizations. SimSpace
Okay.
does live fire events all over the place, where we call them cyber defense exercises, and I think the naming on that is in flux. But the idea is that you would have multiple organizations together doing exercises, maybe against each other.
Okay.
So you can have. I was on the periphery of one a couple months ago where they had red versus red, and it was
Ah.
they called it a castle versus castle event. So that the idea was everyone had their own collection of flags, and they were defending those flags, and everyone could see or could try to steal each other's flags, and whoever had control of those flags the longest accrued the most points. So
Ah.
there's
So it's more about the offensive side of things rather
it
than the
was that one
defensive
was
side.
that
Yeah.
one was so it's like you begin with the end in mind. The end in that case was this castle versus castle exercise. So to support that exercise, we had to build a range in a certain way, and I'm not sure exactly. I mean, the moving pieces of that were obviously the parts of the range necessary to support that scoring capability
Yeah.
of those flags. But if you were just after a fairly normal live fire event, then you would start with range customization, and then you would look at the goals for what you want to accomplish, exactly what you were kind of describing earlier, of what you wanted to get out of that event. So if it's just you wanted to test your team's ability to follow process, for instance,
Yeah.
then it really wouldn't need much in the way of customization, because whatever your process is, you can follow that playbook. I mean, as long as you have a couple of key tools, typically.
Yeah.
Um,
So effectively taking what could be a traditional tabletop exercise and creating a more realistic scenario around that, where they could actually then practice, those processes and see how the processes fare in a real world scenario.
I think that's a great start for envisioning how you would want a live fire exercise to go. Is
Yeah,
like a tabletop exercise with actual teeth,
yeah,
where rather than kind of rolling dice and saying, we could, we got rid of that thread, or that's gone now. Um, you could have the team actually go drill down. It's not something that the folks who take part in a tabletop exercise probably wouldn't be in that live fire event. Although that being said, some of the larger live fire events are in person, and you would have the management team from that organization. You could have them be a control cell, so they could be walking around, looking over shoulders, kind of just taking it all in. So I
yeah.
think that
They could
idea
be
of
part of
it,
the evaluation team, I would have thought as well, to
absolutely,
see how
absolutely, they could
effective
be
the
taking
process was
findings
working.
back to their tabletop exercise, in
Yeah.
that scenario.
So start out, we're going to create an infrastructure that meets the requirements of the organization or organizations. You mentioned there could be multiple organizations. I think there is a lot of things going around about third party threat at the moment. So other organizations are connected together in some way. So integration between their systems. And again, this kind of LFE might be quite good to actually test whether that third party situation is working well, and both teams can actually defend with whichever direction the actual attack comes from.
Right, right. The whole
Yeah.
business to business idea of, I mean, that's certainly an attack vector.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and,
needs to
and
be
we're
practiced.
seeing it in the UK quite a lot now, where the hackers are actually finding the softest target out of all the people that are connected, and going there first, and then using them as the start point to hop off through to where their target is. So
Right,
it's just starting at the softest target and working the way through. So we're going to come up with some infrastructure. We're going to set it out. Next thing, we're going to come up with some objectives, and some of that's going to be a discussion point, I would have thought. So, what we're trying to achieve here. Are we testing the people? Are we testing the process? Are we testing the technology? Or are we testing all three? But what kind of things are we going to look at, and try and make it realistic? Because it's pointless like throwing in 30 attacks simultaneously across all of the infrastructure, because that doesn't happen, does it? It's not real. So
yeah,
it's really coming up with something that's going to be realistic and something that could be a threat for them, that organization. So consider the right approach to take in designing that the objectives and what you're trying to defend against, or attack against, if it was
yeah.
the other way around, in a red on red or red on blue type activity where you're testing the red side. So we've come up with those objectives. How do we map those objectives so we can actually understand what's happening? What are the mechanisms we can do?
So there are some things built into the platform where we keep metrics on things that have happened in the range and in the event. So we have those. And then typically for our actual professional services run engagements where we do this for customers, our ProServe team will actually have scribes working with uh, each side or each team from the customer. So people who are embedded, listening in on conversations, kind of keeping track of all of the things that happened during the event.
Yeah,
So that's how, there are some automatic methods to mapping an objective and keeping track of how that tracks, so that you can use that in the assessment phase. But there's a considerable amount of manual work that goes into to an event for now. We're
yeah,
working on more and more ways of making all that automated. But
But there's going to be quite a bit of manual activity because people talk, don't they? In the team they'll be communicating. It could be chat. It depends on if they're disparate sites. Using different message platforms. It could be live conversation in a room. It could be over some kind of voice medium.
right,
Through telephony, through some kind of voice communication system like Teams, Zoom, those kind of things as well. It all depends on the organization, how they're set up, isn't it? And where the players are. You've got to be able to then capture that information and take notes against that to be able to understand things in context.
exactly. And
Yeah.
the nice part is that the range is more or less static. The things that you set up beforehand aren't going to change, and they should be reproducible for the most part.
Okay, so we've designed our infrastructure. We've put on layer overlaid the cybersecurity component. So whatever SIM tool, whatever other tools are using for EDR and anything else, so it's representative of the customer's organization. We've set out some objectives, and we've met those objectives on the platform. So setting particular tiers for different types of infrastructure and aligning those objectives with it. We've also then looked at how we can capture information that wouldn't be within the system, so that chat or communications verbally between those teams, so we can capture that information. So next stage, I would assume we're going to make sure that both the blue and red team are happy with what we've put together, that the tools work and things like that. So we've got a recce with the blue team, so we're going to go through with them to make sure that they've got everything they need. The tools look like they should be. They're configured in the right way, so they've got their way to defend. And we're going to do the same with the red team to make sure they've got everything they need to be able to carry out the objective they've been set, with the tools that they've been given as well.
Exactly. Make sure all of the rust and cobwebs, as I like to call it, are cleared out. Make sure on the blue side, your events are coming in. You've made sure to make sure the tools are seeing the things that they should see, and then on the red side, make sure that the attacks work that you plan on running. Make sure that the attack surfaces are there. Make sure that there's no artifacts left over from making sure your attacks work, because that's a red flag. Is if the blue team comes in and they start searching around and they're like, oh, okay, I see footsteps of an attacker here and deep into the infrastructure, and that'd be a giveaway. So you just want to make sure the stage is set for a good event. And that's what those recce tiers are
And
for.
something we last week we got to quite late on, only briefly covered. User emulation is quite important in this as well, because if we've got a network that's got no sound on it at all, it's completely quiet. It's going to be really easy for the attackers, to be seen. Because as soon as they start doing some activity, you'll see it straight away. It's going to be, like a pin dropping in silence. You're going to hear it straight away.
Yeah.
So the user emulation is really important because, one, it creates that noise, that background noise, but it's realistic background noise. So it's, end user machines that are actually doing email traffic, working with web applications and things, doing the kind of things they would normally do that generates real network traffic. Yeah. But also, they're going to be part of the attack scenario, I would assume then. So if we're going to, do something like a phishing attack where we're sending in an email that we're going to get a link clicked on and data entered, we're going to use one of those user emulations to do that, I would assume.
Yep, we certainly can. They can be scripted to do a lot of general things. So you can feed them your own list of links to click on, for instance. Or they can do specific things like be instrumented in an attack sequence. We can even feed it a sort of script where we tell it to look for a certain area on the screen that looks like this, find this text, and then find a field, enter something into that field. So if there's a custom application or something that they need to log into and use in order to be part of some apparatus in a live fire event, we can make that happen. So there's
Oh, okay.
the normal user emulation, the kind of the default is just a persona who uses the system from a certain, for a certain time period, and you can make multiples of those.
Okay, so we've created the background noise. We've got that real user emulation on there. We've got the ability to use that user emulation to be part of the attack. So sending an email or getting them to actually do a go to a particular website or something and get a drive-by type activity. So we've got that in place, ready to go. So we're ready to run the event. So how would the event start? What were the kind of things we'd need to do, to kick off the actual event for real?
So what you'd really want to have before the event kicks off is you want to have some scenario laid out that you give the participants, and involved in that scenario, and actually backing up a couple of steps here to the beginning. When you're planning the event, you want to take into consideration how long the event's going to be.
Yeah.
Kind of the shortest period of time for one of these events is a couple hours. The longest I've seen is over a period of a couple days. So
Okay.
depending upon how long the event is, you would dictate the scenario that you would need to have, and the size of that scenario. And so how many attacks you're going to run over the course of that scenario, if there's shift changes. So to kick off the event, you would give the personnel involved. You would lay out the scenario, and you may start with an inject, and an inject would be something like, your manager of accounting came to you, and they had just got a help desk ticket, and they see something suspicious happening on user X's computer.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you would have injects like that throughout the event.
Yeah. So it's set the scene and then have a timetable of events that are going to go, scenarios, like the real world aspects of the scenario, as well as the background attack scenario that's running
Exactly.
in the background. So the kind of things that you'd see, the kind of things that people would experience, to make it as realistic as possible.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think it's quite important when you said about multi-day events, about shift change, because that's also another area of process that might, be challenged. So if you've got multiple SOC teams and you're doing, follow the sun with 3 SOC teams in 3 different time zones, it's that ability to move around and keep operating, but passing over all the right information so that the actual process of defense, that threat hunting, continues accurately and effectively as it goes round as well. Or if it's a shift change inside a SOC in a single site, but we've got this 8-hourly shift change again, we've still got to make sure those processes work. The people that we're evaluating know what they're actually going to do, and also have picked up some of the background information of where they are and what's happened to this point as well. So that briefing of that changeover, that shift change, is quite important in this as well.
It can be a very big deal, and that's where we've seen failure in customers deep into that. If a SOC team is deep into an issue, and the issue is deep into the organization, doing the shift change properly while keeping that issue up in the air and being worked properly can be a huge challenge, and processes don't often meet those challenges. So it's interesting.
And something we always talk about is things dropping between the cracks, and that shift over is a perfect position where things can drop between the cracks as we're handing over from one team to the other. It quite easily we can lose things.
Well, yeah, and you end up with situations where we didn't plan for this, so I just need to work for the next 3 days solid, and that's a non-starter. So when you're stretching your people resources too thin, you should always account for those things. That's why you have multiple shifts.
Yeah.
You don't want the doctor who is on the end of day 3, right, operating on you.
No,
Same
definitely
thing
not.
here.
And coming back to my background in the military is when we would have tactical evaluations, or TAC evals as they used to be called. We would run normally a 3-day scenario of attacks and things, but they would also time things where they knew there was shift handover times. So you've got the new shift coming in, and the previous shift are going to go off to bed or go off to eat or something, and they would time it to make sure that part of the attack scenario happened then, because they
Uh-huh.
knew that's a weak point. And to see how effective the both teams, the offgoing and the oncoming team, can deal with that type of scenario.
And it's when you talk about nation state attackers, that's something if they properly done the investigation work on you, then they will know things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's a just a critical part of your process to be aware of and practice, which is where
Yeah. Or even knowing
live
the
fire event
days.
comes in.
Yeah, even knowing the days where you've got a couple of people off sick,
Yeah,
and using those days for the attack, because they know you're going to be a bit light-handed.
right.
So if they're doing the surveillance correctly, they will pick the weakest point, to actually do it as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it's good to be able to practice those failure modes, because I mean that's what we're
Okay.
talking about is the failure mode of what happens during a shift change, what happens when there's less people than you plan for. So
Okay. So we've designed, we've come up with objectives, we've customized it to meet the needs of both the blue, the red team, and the evaluation team. We've looked at all the scenarios, but both the ingest data that we're going to have through that piece, and we've designed how long this event's going to be, and made sure that the teams are briefed on that as well. Because again, it would be useful to make sure that the blue team knows how long the event's going to run for, because they don't really want to be surprised when they're hitting 12-hour point and it's still running, and they
yes.
think, what do we do now? So that would be a critical part of it. So we've fully briefed everybody. We're going to kick off. So what's the next stage, or is there anything else we need to think about before we start the actual event for real?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay, so
Yeah,
we're going to the event. Everybody's using their tools. They're following the scenario. If they are the attackers, the evaluators are listening to what's happening within the defense team, both electronically and potentially visually and auditory as well. So capturing as much information and documenting that, so we've got good evidence later to talk through what happened and the scenarios and how effective they were in that. So we're running along through this scenario, and we come to the end after, say, 4 hours, 8 hours, maybe 16 hours, depending on the duration of the event. So what happens at that point when we get to the end of the actual event?
actually, right before we get to the end, um, I thought of something. If something comes up where maybe the blue team is just over there scratching their heads and they're not finding
Yeah.
anything, then what you could have happen is the people that are watching the event could be the control cell, could be the purple team, um, depending upon what you call them.
Yeah, I'm going to
They
say
can,
not everybody's got those, so it might be
right.
good to explain what a purple team is, or a white cell. So do you want to give people a picture of what that is, just in case they're not familiar with that term?
Yeah, so in this case, the red team is their own team. They're working for themselves. They're going to report their findings up to the greater organization when all of this is done. Same thing for the blue team. The purple team would be the both teams working together. So it would be people from the red team and people from the blue team talking to each other and trying to help both sides with their response and with their attack. So
Okay.
if the purple team sees that the blue team is really not picking up on what the red team is laying down, then you could throw a tip in, you could throw an ingest
so a
in.
bit of a hint to
Exactly.
help them to keep the momentum.
Yeah, because
Going.
you don't want people, if it's a no matter how long the event is, if you're stuck in the starting blocks, then nobody's going to get anything out of it. So move it along a little bit, get the hint out there. So then to answer your
that hint
question,
might also, take away points from them because they've had to
sure,
have the
that's
hint.
fine,
So
that's
that will
fine.
be
But
taken into account in the evaluation. But it
yes,
means that the exercise can continue rather than
exactly.
stagnating because they've got no clue as
Yeah,
to what to do. And sometimes you get into that situation, don't you? You can't see
absolutely.
the wood from the trees, and it just really gets to a point where you just cannot see what's happening and you can't
Yeah,
go anywhere.
and
So
maybe that could come into the planning for next time. You
yeah.
you can plan through something like that. And maybe make sure there are more seasoned participants on that side or something like that. Or maybe it's a problem in the objectives laid down. Um,
Yeah, that's it.
but you
Yeah,
get through that, and then at the end of the event, you would call it, and so pencils down. We're not scoring anything past this point, um, and after some amount of time, you would crunch the numbers and have the control cell or event managers create a report basically showing what they wanted to, the findings from what they wanted to evaluate.
yeah. So
So
there'd be some kind of like post-report debrief to say this is
exactly,
where we are. These are the major events and things. And at the end, so everybody got a good picture of what's happened through the activity. And then we'd be looking at more in-depth reporting that's put together based on all of the information on the system, what's been captured by the scribes and everywhere, and then that would be brought back and detailed with the organization.
right. And a very easy example of that would be the kind of the built-in reporting that we have, which is if an automated attack was successful, then your team failed
Yeah.
for that attack. If it was unsuccessful, then thumbs up,
They
you
failed.
win.
Yeah,
But
the
so that's a
attackers
very
failed.
black and white.
Yeah,
That's probably not what actually happened in real life, but that's just a
yeah,
very basic example of thumbs up, thumbs down. And you should put more work into it than that, than the automatic scoring. So
yeah,
more work would look like, well, this is the first time you saw anything related to that attack. And so your time to detection is this for that
yeah.
attack. So looking at things like that, looking at all of the metrics that you track during the event, and making sense of them in a report, and so that's where a lot of the work comes in this, and our professional services team delivers a complete slide deck with all of these findings. So
Okay, and that really is a great baseline, then, isn't it? So you know roughly how you've resolved in that particular attack through that LFE. You know how well you did, so that any other corresponding events you can use that to compare how effectively you've been. So if you're reducing the time to detection, if you're ensuring that an attack doesn't go beyond a particular stage in the micro attack framework in the future and the next LFE, you can see progression, can't you? So how you've improved.
yes, and so you could use that for the planning and the objectives for the next round of exercises that you do, and you should use that actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can definitely use it as a baseline.
Okay, I'm conscious of time because we're trying to keep these to about 20 to 30 minutes. We've got a couple of minutes left. So one thing to throw in at this point as well, because it's a range and because of the way the range is set up, when we've actually gone through all of the recce's with everybody and everybody's happy with the infrastructure, what we can also do is clone the range. So we can
That's
take a
right.
copy of it with all of the configuration, all of the changes we've made to meet the needs of the red team and the blue team and the evaluation team. And once we've cloned it, we can actually spin that up quite quickly to actually go back to a start point as well. So if we did go through an LFE and we got to a point where effectively the attackers took down all of the infrastructure, not that they would, hopefully our defenders are going to be good enough to stop that happening, but if we got to a point where it's a catastrophic loss from the defender's perspective, we can actually reset back quite quickly to begin and start again. So it's not having to rebuild everything like you would normally do, if you're actually creating a copy of your live infrastructure in a cloud platform or in a virtual environment and building it all up from scratch. We can quite quickly say, now let's go back to that particular cloned version of the infrastructure, and we'll spin that back up and we can start again fairly quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah, so quite a few things that a range provides. So it's this, simulated environment for a cyber warfare attack scenario, giving the attackers all the right tools, giving the defenders all the right tools, making sure the evaluation team have got everything they need to do to be able to understand how the scenario's gone, briefing people, getting everything ready, but also this ability to go back to the beginning if we need to, like a quick reset button and start again if it's needed in that event, or even that can be used again for the next LFE because we've got it all set up the first time. We can repeat that live fire exercise in the future using that cloned network because we've got it all ready to go for the future.
Yeah, if you think about it as a sound stage or a production stage with all of the set pieces, that's an analogy for kind of our system for having the events. You have you have the range, you have the attacks, you have the user emulation.
All pre-configured.
Yep. All ready to go.
Right, we've run out of time because we're a minute over or two now. So just to give you a picture, next week what we're doing is moving on to how a range can be used for different type. We've talked about generics of a range. We've talked about today about running live fire exercises, how you actually work as a team, both on the attack or defense side in evaluation. But next week what we're going to talk about is training and how individuals, say a new starter comes into an organization, and how we might want to evaluate them to check that what they've told us on paper and in the interview are real, because strangely enough, people lie on their CVs or their resumes, depending on which side of the water you are. They tend to lie and say they've got better capabilities in certain areas. Wouldn't it be good to know that what they're telling you is the truth and they're actually quite good, and to fit them into the SOC team? Also, continual development. We need to make sure that our SOC team individuals are learning all the new APTs, are looking at all the different ways to identify compromise. They've got all these skills in their pocket because they've done the training. But the key thing is, how do you actually make that more realistic? And we're going to talk next week about how you can do training, but also use a cyber range to build on that knowledge that's gained in the training by actually doing it for real and learning a skill, which is quite different. So that's next week. Any final words or anything, Jesse, before we shut things down today?
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, so I think we've covered everything from an LFE. It'd be great to get anybody's comments and things. If you've got any questions or anything, again, quite happy to give you any information you want. So please, just drop us some questions on the comments on the event, and we hope to see you next Wednesday at 2 p.m. I nearly said Tuesday because I do a regular Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So it is Wednesday next week at 2 p.m. GMT again, where we're going to talk about training and how it can be used within the cyber range and get more effective training. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.